Hey everybody, well it's that time of year again where we talk about my favorite and least favorite films of the past year, and yeah, this was kind of an interesting way to kind of look at the different kind of releases of films in terms of how the pandemic kind of either delayed films or had them go to streaming services or video on demand. So I hope you can understand that I didn't exactly get to see every film that came out this year, and there are still some prominent ones that I still have yet to see, like Palm Springs, Shirley, Promising Young Woman, Minari, or any of the Small Axe films. So this list is going to be mostly just what I was able to see and what I was able to enjoy. So bear with me on that one. But with that said, let's get into the best of things.
Unlike most video game movie directors, Jeff Fowler listened to the fans and not only fixed up the atrocious 2019 look originally planned, but also gave us something that most usually forget to do: be a fun movie. While the story is predictable, Sonic trying to get back home and escape Earth, and has some cringy jokes that are stereotypical for kids' movies, the rest of the humor had me laughing with how well these actors work off each other. The action scenes and special effects kept me on my toes, and I love how they were able to explain how Robotnik is able to keep up with Sonic. Ben Schwartz is a very good Sonic, right up there with Jaleel White and Roger Craig Smith. He has very pleasing delivery, and his banter with James Marsden, who plays Tom, was some of the more engaging parts of the movie, being that they both have the struggle of whether or not they should leave home. Jim Carrey was very entertaining as Dr. Robotnik, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing him again in the sequel, and I'm actually glad that he's just open to do that now. If you need proof that video game movies can actually be legitimately good movies, give this a watch and don't ever doubt what Sonic can't do.
How are you not dead?
I have no idea!
Oh, give me a big fat break!
From Craig Zorville, the co-creator of Homestar Runner, I'm dead serious about that, comes a modern retelling of The Most Dangerous Game. The film was originally set for a 2019 release, but was pushed back, and at one point was actually shelved until the waters cooled down. The premise is simple. Lower class people are captured and hunted for sport by rich people, but one, Crystal Creasy, outsmarts their game. Zorbo makes it clear to establish a clear humanity with both our hero and villain respectively. The action scenes and editing are very sharp and on point, with each of the kills getting a strong reaction. Betty Giplin as Crystal is one badass woman you do not want to tango with. Not the sharpest knife, but a knife's a knife if you misprice cigarettes. I especially loved her chemistry with Hilary Swank, especially in the final fight scene throughout the house. And I love the conversation that they both have, just trying to discuss different ideologies as to why they have a reasoning to beat each other up. Look, if violent movies aren't your thing, that's fine, but if you're saying you're not gonna like this because of some political biased bullshit, well, that's your problem, buddy.
We'll see. This is a wild game of survival.
When we all thought the Dark Universe crumbled into a black hole as soon as it formed, Blumhouse decided to take whatever was left and make something of their own. Leigh Whannell's modern interpretation of the H.G. Wells stories is one of the most disturbing horror remakes I've ever seen, as you follow the perspective of one of the victims of the Invisible Man and how he's able to do it. The explanation is horrifying because of how real it's becoming. Some people have actually questioned the motives on the Invisible Man as well as the way he does become invisible, but Honestly, after hearing all the shit that happened with Jeffrey Epstein, I'm honestly not putting anything that far-fetched anymore. Elizabeth Moss has slowly been becoming one of my favorite new horror actresses, right alongside Toni Collette, and is downright Oscar-worthy in this role. She perfectly captures that abuse victim and mental collapse perfectly, and how she deals with the kind of torture she's put through is deeply unsettling. The camera work and editing complement each other very nicely as you're constantly playing Where's Waldo with every wide shot in the movie. The dinner scene made me never want to go to restaurants ever again. You know, before COVID hit. Depending on the filmmaker they hire and how they utilize their budget, Blumhouse has proven that they can put out top-notch content. And if you haven't seen this yet, I highly recommend you get on HBO Max and give it a watch. But watch carefully.
Let me help you.
You can't help me. Surprise.
The last animated movie to salvage the last momentum of box office before the pandemic got us into a lockdown, or at least in the US, barely a lockdown. On the surface, it doesn't seem that out of the ordinary from other Pixar efforts, but if you really settle into it, it's more touching than I originally gave credit for. And this is coming from someone who is a Pixar fan. In a world where mythical creatures live as modern-day humans, Onward centers on two brothers, Ian and Barley, who go on a quest to bring their dad back to life for a day. It felt like what the movie Bright tried to be with the whole modern-day mythical creature world, but what separates them are the leads. Tom Holland and Chris Pratt give their best performances as Ian and Barley. They remind me so much of my older brothers when we were younger, trying to get me into their hobbies and having little adventures. There are days when it can be overwhelming, and there are other days where it can be an adrenaline rush we've been looking for. And other times, it could just be nice to just sit down and talk and enjoy each other's company. The animation, while not in my top 3 from Pixar, is still astonishing. And the music by the Dana brothers helped the movie attain this nostalgic and comforting atmosphere that makes movies like these feel like one of Pixar's early projects. The ending in this film also brought me to tears, and let's just say there's one particular shot in the movie that just got me crying heavily. While it may not be my favorite Pixar film, if you've got an older brother figure in your life, this is definitely the kind of film you would enjoy.
I am on my way, boys. Just stay out of trouble.
Do you remember the movie Nerve? Do you wish it was R-rated and also starred Harry Potter? Well, watch Guns Akimbo and you'll get your wish. After his trolling gets him in trouble with the makers of a life or death game, Schism, Miles Harris is forcibly registered and must survive getting hunted, all while guns are bolted to his hands. Jason Lee Howden in his filmmaking debut delivered such a crazy thrill ride that you'll need to pause just to catch your breath as the intensity keeps rising. Granted, I don't condone his Twitter behavior, but that's not what we're discussing. Every frame, every edit, and every sequence you're taking on feels like you're on some kind of high while also being under a massive hangover. Adding on to the limited ammo in Miles' guns, that tension amps up within this whole chaos. Daniel Radcliffe is both funny and endearing as he goes from this loser mobile game designer to a traumatized vigilante. Samara Weaving once again gives a badass performance playing this tenacious hunter who acknowledges her game but clearly has something bigger planned. If you liked her in the movie Ready or Not, you would definitely get a thrill from seeing her in this movie. Ned Dennehy is hilarious as the villain Richter and has easily one of the funniest taunts I ever heard. Since leaving Harry Potter, Radcliffe had made the right decision by going the opposite way of Emma Watson, doing the fun and bizarre projects that people will most remember, like this, Horns, and Swiss Army Man.
I wouldn't do that if I was you. You'll just end up blowing your damn face off. Then you'll still be depressed. Even more depressed, probably, because of your fucked up face.
Among the films that I risked going to see in theaters during the pandemic, Come Play was the only one that I thought was truly worth it. When little Oliver, a nonverbal autistic boy, is in the middle of his parents' divorce and feeling isolated, he becomes the perfect prey for the entity of loneliness, Larry. Jacob Chase crafted a true love letter to classic emblem horror films like Gremlins, Monster House, and Poltergeist by giving us a film that stands among those proudly. The cinematography by Maxime Alexandre, who did Shazam and The Haunting of Bly Manor, complements so nicely with the visual effects by the Henson Company. Kudos to the team for using a practical monster instead of entirely using CGI. And Larry being the metaphor for what takes you from too much screen time really works to the film's advantage, if you ask me. Azzy Robertson as Oliver is fantastic, perfectly representing how an actual autistic kid would react in these circumstances. Whether he's actually autistic or not in real life, he did a fantastic job with his performance. Gillian Jacobs and John Gallagher Jr. are both solid as the parents, settling their divorce in a more calming manner than usually seen in most movies, but also realizing how important it is going to be on their son's mental health. While not exactly my favorite horror film to come out this year, it certainly was a better fit for theaters than Tenet was. During the summer, Disney gave us a reason to stay home with their streaming premiere of Lin-Manuel Miranda's iconic 2016 musical. This movie goes out of its way to leave no stone unturned with points of Alexander Hamilton's life that we either forgot or sadly never knew until then. How rules of Congress were constantly changing with each passing president even back then, owning up to mistakes that led to the earliest smear campaigns, and how toxic relationships in DC can really get. As for the music, and as someone who wasn't really too big with his introduction in the Heights, this and Moana made me appreciate how truly talented Lin-Manuel Miranda really was. Same goes for the rest of the cast involved. David Diggs, who went on to do Blind Spotting and Central Park, Jonathan Groff from Frozen, Jasmine Cephas-Jones and Anthony Ramos, Leslie Odom Jr. from One Night in Miami, Renee Goldsberry, Philippa Sue, Christopher Jackson. This is a movie that gives you optimism that we can all survive from a lot of corruption that the Founding Fathers have all warned us about, and that we deify politicians who are just as human as all of us. We have to all remember that. And as we just demonstrated, we have the power to vote these people out.
This is Hamilton.
Based on the script by Jack Fincher, the late father of David Fincher, who directs this biopic, we focus on Herman J. Mankiewicz, the writer of Citizen Kane at the request of Orson Welles. Fincher was eager to make this film since the late 90s, and he goes above and beyond to make this film feel as much like a Hays Code era picture as much as possible, right down to the cinematography and the sound design. You could do a double feature of this and Citizen Kane, and you would think that they were made within the same decade. The score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is excellent, and after this and Soul, they have my support for best score regardless of whichever gets the win. Gary Oldman gives a magnificent performance playing Mank, clashing with some of his boss's hypocrisy about politics and movies. That speech at the Halloween party pitching Kane is easily one of Oldman's finest performances if you ask me. Amanda Seyfried completely blew me away as Marion Davies. Half a decade ago, if you told me that I'd be saying those words, I would have told you were crazy. But she kept up with Oldman very perfectly. Lily Collins as Mank's secretary was equally as good, keeping up with his alcoholism and his needs to meet the deadline. Charles Dance as William Randolph Hearst and Tom Burke as Orson Welles make great adversaries to Mank. Apparently, according to Fincher, he had to tone down his dad's script originally because of how anti-Welles it felt. Although, considering the documentary They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, I doubt that would hurt much. We also get cameos from Bill Nye the Science Guy, Ben Mankiewicz, Herman's grandson, turned co-founder of the Young Turks and TCM host. It's more than just a love letter to the movies. It's a love letter to the unsung heroes of films, the writers. And in Fincher's case, it was a love letter to his dad's love for movies.
I gave you a second chance.
You cannot capture a man's entire life in 2 hours. All you can hope is to leave the impression of one.
Why Hearst? Outside his own blonde Betty Boop, you're always his favorite dinner partner.
Are you familiar with the parable of the organ grinder's monkey?
Despite this being a late 60s period piece, I could not think of a more relevant film to show in 2020 than this one. The trial of the Chicago 7 is based on the trial of 7 individuals who took part in the police riot at the 68 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Sorkin brings to light every hot-button issue that our system has become disconnected with, making a 50-year-old story seem as though it happened just a week ago. We've just been dealing with such a corrupted system that we've been beaten down by it so much it's become mundane. Everyone in the cast is magnificent, and I can't think of a single bad performance. Frank Langella was a ruthless bastard as Judge Hoffman. Mark Rylance and Joseph Gordon-Levitt do great as the lawyers representing each side. Kevin Harrison Jr. and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II as Fred Hampton and Bobby Seale are also fantastic. And then, of course, this brings us to the Chicago 7 themselves. Eddie Redmayne, Jeremy Strong, John Carroll Lynch, Alex Sharp, Noah Robbins, and Daniel Flaherty are all fantastic. However, it was Sacha Baron Cohen as Abby Hoffman that stole the show. Whenever he was on screen, even with someone like Eddie Redmayne, I always had my eyes glued to him. Whether it was making me laugh or tear up at how honest he was, you can clearly tell that they're on the same side, but neither of them can come to a clear solution. Out of all of them, Baron Cohen is my pick for Best Supporting Actor this year, and if he doesn't even get nominated, that's gonna be disgusting. But then again, any one of them getting nominated would be perfectly fine with me. I will confess, the ending did feel a little bit hokey compared to the rest of it. But that's a nitpick if you ask me. Regardless, The Trial of the Chicago 7 is one of the most riveting courtroom dramas I have seen in recent years, and it definitely earns every bit of the praise it gets.
Now, how much is it worth to you? What's your price?
To call off the revolution?
My life.
Open your eyes, 'cause a new day.
After bringing Fences to the big screen, Denzel Washington delivers another August Wilson adaptation about the first recording of Ma Rainey's first album. The movie has this claustrophobic feel like the characters are sitting right next to you, like a stage play would. And much like Fences, the acting and the dialogue is where the film truly shines. While Denzel wasn't the director, George C. Wolfe puts himself at his level with how much everybody gets at their throats at certain points. Viola Davis as Ma Rainey never misses a beat. Putting aside the makeup, she commands every scene that she's in. She knows how to throw her nose and wants around at people, so when she demands it, you better get the damn Coke bottles. And we also get some great performances from Gil Turman and Coleman Domingo as other band members. However, Chadwick Boseman was the only one who actually matched up to Viola Davis. He not only gave the best performance of the year, and is obviously my pick for Best Actor this year, but he gave his swan song performance. This was his final role before passing away after a 4-year battle with colon cancer, so to see him going into detail about what kind of life Levy has led up to that point, both with mental and physical scars at hand and how his world keeps falling apart, it becomes one of the most haunting performances I have ever watched. But I have to be honest, truth be told, after going through 4 of the biggest comic book movies ever made and giving 2 Oscar-worthy performances in 2020, he went from playing black icons in his career to ending his career as a black icon. And I gotta say, that's a pretty badass legacy to go with, if you ask me. The score by Branford Marsalis is also excellent, the look of 1920 Chicago and the arrangement of the old Ma Rainey songs are absolutely beautiful. If you haven't seen this movie yet, hop on Netflix and give yourself a couple hours to Ma Rainey.
Come on!
When I caught wind Charlie Kaufman was developing a psychological horror film, I got excited and completely terrified. I knew the film was going to be top quality, but I was worried about how my mental state was going to be after viewing it. Based on the novel by Ian Reid, who serves as the co-producer, we follow the perspective of a young woman being taken to her boyfriend's parents' house, but she's thinking about ending things with him. The bending of dream and reality start to take over as we intercut the young couple's journey with the life of an old man. Kaufman's best strength is always taking you to the real world through the eyes of somebody's broken memories, and I dare even say this is his best work since Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. He can delve deep into the darker struggles of contemplating life's meanings, which in essence is the true horror that nobody ever wants to admit. The cinematography and music give off the impression that this is a surrealist love story, but it's all a matter of letting your guard down as the true horror seeps in. Jessie Berkley gives a great performance, despite how more attentive Jake's parents are of her than Jake. You'd think at first this is going to be her story, but clearly something is starting to blur the lines at certain points. David Thewlis and Toni Collette are hauntingly good as the parents, and by the time you figure out what the film is aiming for, it becomes all the more heartbreaking and terrifying to sit through. Also, if Collette isn't nominated for an Oscar, I'm not bothering with it this year. Guy Boyd as the old man, despite his lack of screen time, carries an effective presence, but his performance is only elevated by Jesse Plemons as Jake. To hear him talk about his life despite some ups and how media consumption has completely warped our sense of human connection, all I could do was cry for him. All of us deep down wish we could have our stories have a little bit that movie magic, how we want to be the hero that everyone loves and pays attention to, but the luck of the draw could have us all end up being maggot-filled pigs that end up getting eaten alive. With how difficult 2020 has been, and with how stuck up the pandemic has made us, I'm thinking of ending things ended up being the perfect way to summarize a majority mindset. It's a horror film about the horrors of reality crumbling before us, and I ironically loved every minute of it.
Maybe this is how it was always going to end.
Once again, Pete Docter and his team at Pixar gave us another inspiring and thought-provoking masterpiece that both kids and adults can appreciate. And considering it's a family film discussing mortality, that is really saying something. After getting a dream gig, Joe Gardner has a near-death experience that lands him in the Great Before. His best bet to get back home alive is to help the Soul 22 find her spark for Earth. While Pixar hasn't shied away from mentioning death in its movies, this is the first one, and actually one of those rare animated movies where the subject of death is brought to the forefront. The score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross moved me to tears and tapping to the beat both times. And the jazz compositions by John Baptiste of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert are beautiful, and the animators perfectly captured his piano skills for Joe's hands. Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey give the best performances of their careers. Even knowing it was them, I hardly recognized their voices. While 22 does come off as annoying, it's tolerable to where you're understanding the stakes in the story, especially using their sense of humor to hide their biggest anxieties. And Joe also manages to learn from 22 that being obsessed with our dreams is only going to make us lost, so the real thing we need to do is enjoy life as much as we can. Inside Out showed us a tender way of explaining one's mental problems and emotional insecurity. Soul gave us not only a film about life's purpose, but a film about enjoying what life offers. Listening to the behind the scenes really kept me invested, and I highly recommend you do that as well. To quote John Hughes, "Life moves pretty fast, and if you don't stop to look around once in a while, you might just miss it."
Don't miss out on the joys of life. Like, pizza. I can't smell. We can't taste either?
All that stuff is in your body.
No smell, no taste.
Or touch. See?
Okay, I get it.
Disney and Pixar Soul.
A dystopian monster movie about finding true love at the end of the world, and it's surprisingly really good, especially for this time frame. In a dystopia where mutations have made insects and creatures become monsters, the indecisive survivor Joel Dawson leaves his surviving colony in order to go look for the love of his life. Dylan O'Brien is very relatable as Joel Dawson. My favorite scenes are when he's conversing with the dog that joins him along the way, giving the film some downtime to show us their empathy for one another. It was also kind of refreshing to not see some secret perfect badass that we usually see in these kind of films, and to watch him grow and learn throughout the course of his journey. Especially when he's traveling with Clyde and Minnow, played by Michael Rooker and Ariana Greenblatt. As you explore the world this movie creates, the designs and movements of the giant monsters are handled beautifully. While CGI is used, it's mostly done as slightly touching up the practical effects. The giant bugs and mutated toads, while ridiculous on paper, have very intense executions when they're done on screen. You will go from being grossed out to downright frightened in a millisecond. I can only imagine what this world's depiction of murder hornets looks like. Also, I'm not really spoiling anything, but it was kind of funny reading about how this was one of 2 scripts that Brian Duffield submitted that had the same ending monster, yet this one had to get changed due to copyright. At the end of the day, this is a fun monster movie that shows you that whether it's the love of a significant other, the love of friends you help along the way, or the love of those that truly define your family, this movie will definitely give you all kinds of feelings and emotions. This film went from being a simple Redbox movie to being a film I owned on 4K. Imagine that.
Thank you all for watching. If you want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to check out my podcast with Melissa Leach down in the description below.